I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Julie Hamilton. So I want all of you guys to give her your full attention and stand to your feet. Give her a warm standing ovation. Give her a clap.
Good to be here. What an exciting opportunity this is for you guys to really grow. This is really cool. So I'm a marriage and family therapist, but basically a therapist, and I work with a wide range of issues. So all different types of individual, marital, and family issues. So I am happy and excited to be here to share with you guys. I did want to share on this page in your book, page 39 that you have in your book. This kind of just speaks, this isn't the main topic that I'm going to talk about, but I wanted to point this out because this sort of speaks to the benefit of what you guys are getting here. If you look at these statistics, it says here that 18% of adults have a mental health condition, which is over 43 million Americans. That's a lot of people struggling with mental health issues. And then it says here that nearly half also have a substance abuse disorder. So there's often co-occurring mental health and substance abuse going on at the same time. It says that 9.6 million experience suicidal ideation. That's this slide right here. And so that's a lot of struggling that goes on in our country. And then there's other statistics around the world. And so if you look here, for young people, for youth, mental health is also a concern. It says here that mental health is worsening and access to care is limited. So it shows here the increase in rates of severe depression from 5.9% to 8.2% in a 5-year period. So teenagers are struggling with depression, with substance abuse struggles, with mental health issues, with parents who are dealing with mental health issues or substance issues. And the reason that I think this is all relevant is that this week you guys have the opportunity to get help and get healthy. Not necessarily help for your specific problem, but this is going to apply to overall mental health, relational health, social health. So this is a really exciting opportunity, and I would encourage you to soak it all in and to take in what you're hearing and then seek to apply it in your life. And then throughout the coming year, you'll have the opportunity for continued growth and continued development as you stay plugged in and connected with this group. So this is really just a wonderful opportunity, and you guys can be the exception to some of these statistics. You can get healthy now and grow into adulthood healthier than you would have had you not had this opportunity to really grow socially, emotionally, and spiritually as well. All right, so now I'm going to be talking about myths, popular myths in our culture. One of the topics that I'm really interested in, and I have developed a good portion of my career into this topic, is topics related to LGBT themes. So I was the president of a research organization I was on the board of a scientific organization for years, looking at the research behind the issue of homosexuality and gender identity. And so I was on the board for 10 years. I was the president for 3 years. I've been a spokesperson on this issue in a lot of different venues. And so I like to talk about this because back in 1997, when I was getting my PhD in marriage and family therapy, I had a close family member who I dearly love who came to me and said he was gay. Well, he had been married to a woman and had been with her for 12 years. And when he told me he was gay, I was really surprised. I didn't know that. He had left her, but he was explaining to me that he was gay. And at the time, I really didn't know anything about the topic, really. I just thought, well, he was either born this way or he chose it. I had always really grown up believing he chose it. But when he shared this with me, he said, I didn't choose to feel this way, and he really kind of explained what he was going through, and it made me wonder. It made me want to learn about the topic, because I didn't know anything other than I figured he chose it, and that was all I knew. So at the same time, my parents also started digging for information, because it affected their lives as well, and so we all started digging for information, and I found that they found as well that there is a ton of information, but it's sort of politically buried. And instead, myths are promoted in our culture, and the facts, the scientific data, is kind of buried. So eventually I got involved with this scientific organization, and like I said, I became a leader within the organization over the years, and I learned so much, and I kind of got on a mission to want to share with others, because it's important information that really makes a difference to people that are dealing with these issues themselves. It makes a difference for a number of reasons. So I'm going to go through I'm going to talk about just 5 myths that are really popular in our culture and explain what the science says about these topics. Okay, so the first thing is that I thought that he was either born gay or he chose it. So I'm going to ask you guys not to say this out loud, but to think to yourself, with each of these myths, I'm going to ask you your thoughts on them before I tell you what the science says. I'm going to see what you've heard and what you might believe to be true. So you don't have to answer this out loud, but just to yourself. Do you think people are born gay, or do you think they choose to be, don't answer out loud, I'll let you just answer quietly to yourself, or do you think they choose to be gay? All right, as soon as you have your answer, okay, are you ready? It is neither. People aren't born gay and they don't choose to be gay. How many of you knew that? You don't have to raise your hand, but it's neither, right? So here's the scoop on that. We know that people don't just choose their attractions. We don't choose who we're attracted to. We can choose whether to follow our attractions or not, right? So a guy might be attracted to other guys. He can choose whether to pursue a relationship with other guys or not. That's where choice comes in. It's in what we do. You know, a married heterosexual man might be attracted to another woman, and he chooses whether to follow those attractions or whether to stay faithful. We choose what we do with our feelings, but the feelings aren't a conscious choice. Okay, so we also know people are not born gay. They're not born homosexual. So the research, in the 1990s, researchers really looked to prove that it was biological. Researchers wanted to prove that you're born gay because activists believed that gay rights could advance a lot further if it was biological. So they decided it would be easier to build a case for gay rights if we could prove people are born gay. So they sought out to prove that people are born gay, and they never could. But along the way, they convinced the culture that people are born gay. So there were studies that were done, a gene study. They claimed we found a gay gene. A few years later, they said, oh, we didn't find a gay gene. But nobody told the rest of the world that. So the gene study comes out and you hear on the news, there's been a gay gene found. Well, then the researcher, they're trying to replicate that study and trying to substantiate that it is true. And they realized it's not true, but nobody went back and said, oh, we didn't find a gay gene, there's no gay gene. So the culture was led to believe. There were brain studies done which proved nothing about cause of homosexuality, and other studies, and you may hear all different things like, oh, we know people are born gay because of this or because of that. Well, none of that was ever found to be true in the scientific community. In fact, what researchers know is that the identical twin studies that have been done since the year 2000, so in the last 20 years, identical twin studies have proved it's not biological, because what we know is when one identical twin is gay, less than 20% of the time is the other one also gay. So if it were biological, we would see a much higher rate of both identical twins being gay. But what researchers have concluded is that there are things going on in a person's life that lead the person to develop same-sex attractions, to be attracted to the same sex. It's environmental. Most people will say it's nature and nurture, and I'm going to explain that. In fact, before I go on with the other myths, I want to stop here and explain what I believe leads a person to have same-sex attractions. If you're not born gay and it's not a choice, then what is it? So let me explain that to you guys. And I want to say this, it's a developmental issue, and human development is very complex. So while I'm explaining this, please keep in mind that there's so many factors that go into our development from the time we're born, really, as we grow up. A lot of things are affecting us. And so if I explain some things that maybe were true in your life, keep in mind, it's a lot of factors that go into it. So if I say, well, this happens, and you think, oh, that happened to me, that doesn't mean you're gay. So if you walked into this room not thinking you were gay, please don't leave the room thinking you're gay, because it's a lot of factors. So I might describe some things that you have experienced in your life, but that alone is not enough to make a person gay. It's a combination, okay? And every person is affected differently by what happens to them. So one child might be, you could see two children grow up in the same family, and maybe there's abuse in the family. It affects one child one way and one child another way because the children are different, and how they receive it and take it in is different. So I'm going to explain some of the dynamics, but again, it depends on the individual and all the various circumstances coming together. So same-sex attractions often develop they're related to the development of gender identity. So gender identity is how a person sees himself or herself in terms of their gender. So when I'm going to explain male development, and because boys are easier to understand, and then I'll go back and explain female development. But I also am going to explain development, like typical development that does not lead to homosexual attractions, kind of like what we need in our development, and then I'll go back and explain what is missing that can lead a person to having same-sex attractions. So when babies are born, the first person they bond with is the mother. They're bonding with the mother from the time they're in the womb. The mother's the one carrying them, right? So that's the first attachment figure. And then the mother is typically the source of food. By design, the mother is the source of food for at least the first year, even longer. And so the baby attaches to the mother, then to the father. So in the beginning, the mother is the first attachment figure. So between 1.5 and 3 years old is what's called the gender identity phase. That is where a little boy will need to kind of he begins naturally on his own to kind of detach from just that oneness with the mother, and he attaches to the father, and he begins to look to the father to understand who he is. We learn about ourselves first through our relationship with the same-sex parent. So in other words, a little boy looks to the father and he's wondering, what does it mean to be a boy? How do boys act? How do they walk? How do they talk? Who am I as a boy? Do I measure up? Do I have what it takes? Do you see value in me? So the little boy looks to the father, and the father answers all those questions through the relationship. The father spends time with the son, shows interest in the son. He verbally affirms the son. I'm so proud of you. I'm so glad you're my son. You're such a wonderful guy. All of this. The father verbally affirms him, and the father physically affirms him, both affectionately as well as even playing wrestling, playing rough and tumble kind of play. Through that bond with the father, the boy develops a sense of who he is as a boy. He starts developing that sense. So then, between the ages of 5 and, so that's 1.5 to 3 or 4, he bonds with the dad. Between the ages of 5 through puberty, which is like 10, 11, 12, through those elementary school years, the boy begins to bond with other boys. So around the age of 5, he goes to school, and he looks to other boys to understand more about what it means to be a boy. So he looks to the boys. How do boys act? How do they play? What are they like? Do I fit in? Do I measure up? Do I have what they have? Are they going to include me? And so little by little, in his relationship with other boys and continuing in his relationship with his dad, he slowly but surely begins to understand who he is as a male. And he begins to feel confident as a male. Yes, I do have what it takes. I do fit in. I am one of these boys. And the more he develops a sense of who he is, when he's becoming solid in his sense of who he is in his masculinity, then around puberty, he will begin to be curious about the opposite sex. So he's grown up kind of surrounded by boys and his dad, and now he's looking to girls and he's curious, what are girls all about? What is this? And at the same time when puberty's happening, his body's changing and he's developing sexual feelings, and he begins to find not just the curiosity, but attraction to other girls. Okay, so that's typical development. Now for the boy that will end up later having same-sex attraction or homosexual attraction, what I just described often does not happen that way. So typically things disrupt that process. So for that boy, there may be something that interrupts the bond with the mother, but then between the age of 1.5 and 3, there's often something that interrupts his attachment to his father. Again, remember, he has to attach to the same-sex parent to understand who he is. So something can disrupt that attachment. Either the dad is not there, or the dad is rejecting of him, or he perceives that the dad is rejecting. So this is where nature might fit in a little bit. Typically, children who end up with same-sex attractions have a more sensitive temperament. I think you guys are going to talk about temperaments this week. Typically, this child will be the more sensitive child who might actually perceive rejection when rejection isn't meant. So a sensitive temperament is a wonderful thing. The challenge to it is those children take things in at a deep level. They feel deeply, they think deeply, they're really analytical, they're reading between the lines sometimes they're reading between the lines inaccurately. So that child might think, oh, my dad works a lot, he doesn't love me, he doesn't want to spend time with me. He might be analyzing so much and taking it in so deeply that he's misunderstanding, and he's receiving and perceiving rejection when rejection isn't meant. So that little boy, so that's the part where nature might play a role. Like he might by nature be more sensitive. He also by nature might be more artistic, which is a great skill and quality, but he may not be as athletic naturally, which may make it harder for him to join in with peers later. Remember I said boys need to be able to bond with other boys? If he doesn't find boys that are like him, it might make it difficult for him to have solid bond and connection with other boys. So that might be the nature part, where his temperament, that's not enough to make a person gay, but it's enough to set a person up to experience things in a way that could impact his view of himself. So again, it's the formation of gender identity is what can later lead to same-sex attraction. So let's go back to the formation here. So this little boy around 1.5 to 3, something stops him from bonding with the father. Either he perceives the father to be rejecting, or the father is doing things that are, maybe he's calling the boy names, or making the child feel that he doesn't have what it takes to be, the masculinity that he really possesses. The father might make the son feel like he doesn't possess masculinity. So there might be things that happen. It could even be the father loves his son very much, but maybe he yells when he gets angry. And to a sensitive 2-year-old boy, a yelling man can be very scary. So that child will want the relationship with the dad, but if he perceives rejection, or if he's intimidated, or if he sees the dad in a negative light, he might instead stay bonded to the mom and give up trying to attach to the dad. This can happen too if he sees the parents fighting and the dad is mean to the mom. He might think, if that's what it means to be man, I don't want that. If that's what masculinity is all about, I don't want that. He might feel more loyal to the mom and feel bad for her, so he aligns more with her. And they say what happens is he puts up a wall towards the dad, and now it's called defensive detachment, where he's saying, well, fine, if you're going to reject me, if you're rejecting me, I reject you, or I don't want what you have to offer if what you have to offer is mean or is unattractive. So he puts up a wall. He instead then soaks in the femininity that his mom has to offer. He learns about what it is to be, what women are all about, not what it is to be a woman, what women are all about. Usually this little boy is also surrounded by other women. He often will be surrounded by other women, like a grandmother, sisters, aunts. Usually that boy has lots of women in his life, but not a lot of male input. So he kind of learns about femininity, but he's craving to learn about masculinity. It's just, he's not finding the opportunity for that. He's not seeing masculinity that looks worth striving for, but he's craving connection with his father. And then by the time he's 5 and goes to school, he will want to relate to other boys, but he may be intimidated by other boys. He might be more comfortable with girls. He may be ostracized by the other boys if he hasn't learned how to fit in with other boys. So this little boy will often go through elementary school bonding with girls instead of boys, but he's craving male love because that's how God designed him, to need that connection with the dad and connection with other peers. So by the time he reaches puberty, that craving for male love doesn't go away. It often, in fact, when God-given needs aren't met, they don't just go away. They will often intensify or take on another form. So that need for male love is growing all throughout those elementary school years. And by the time he hits puberty, that craving for male love ends up becoming more of like a romantic craving because his body's changing, he's developing sexual feelings. It's almost like the wires kind of get crossed where that emotional need now becomes sexualized. And so to that boy, it does not feel like, it's certainly not a conscious choice. And for that boy that's craving that male love all that time, and now he's romanticizing other boys, to him it feels like he was born that way because he's been craving male love all along. The thing is, he wasn't craving romantic relationships with other boys. It was the emotional need that wasn't met. But he feels like he's been attracted to other boys his whole life. Again, he had emotional needs that just weren't met. But we have to be very compassionate when it comes to this issue because many children really are just craving the love that they are not getting. And then when it becomes sexualized, it's not a conscious thing that's happening on their part. And they've been hurting for a long time. And it's important that we have compassion and see people as, and I think it's nice in this kind of format, you all are sharing some of your hurts with one another. That generates compassion as well because then you realize people are hurting. They're hurting in all different sort of ways. And when we hear the pain of others, we can be more compassionate. So I think this is a good format for developing compassion and understanding of others. So let me just say a couple things about girls and then we'll go on to the myths. But for development, for female development, there are some girls who develop same-sex attraction in a similar way. So instead of bonding, so for girls, their challenge is to stay attached to the mother during that 1.5 to 3 or 4 years old. They need to be able to see their mom as admirable. I want to be like her and be able to look up to her and be able to soak in what she has to offer, which is femininity and feminine identity. So understanding who a girl is in relation to her mother, she begins to understand herself as a female. So for some girls that doesn't happen. They bond more with the dad and other boys at a time they need to be bonding with other girls. They might go through elementary school bonding with boys instead of girls for a number of reasons. Sometimes a mom is depressed after having a baby. Hormones play a role in that. So the mom might not be able to bond, or the mom and baby might be separated. Maybe the baby is hospitalized or the mom is hospitalized, so there may be a break in their attachment. Or there could be other things that go on where the girl, there's same thing like with the boy. The girl may perceive rejection when rejection isn't meant. Typically with girls, it's that same temperament that we talked about. Sensitive, very analytical, deep feeling, taking things in at a deep level, sometimes taking things in the wrong way, feeling rejected, feeling inadequate as a girl, and because they're misinterpreting cues that are happening. Or they're having adverse circumstances. Sexual abuse can be another thing that confuses children, and that can confuse children in a number of different ways. Same-sex attraction can be one outcome of sexual abuse, but it's not the only outcome. There can be other outcomes as well. And another thing I did mention, pornography exposure. It can also confuse a child sexually and can alter a child's sexual appetites, especially, seeing things in childhood that a child can't really process or understand. So there are all of these things that can happen. Another thing for girls, for some girls, they may not have that development that I described, but for some, it's trendy. So right now, it's kind of trendy or cool to say you're bisexual. So some girls take on that label more to fit in, but then when they take on that label and they begin to experiment and get in relationships, that can create appetites, especially for girls. Girls are very, their romantic feelings can be shaped by their emotional relationships. And so for girls, there can be a few different avenues into having same-sex attractions. So does that make sense to everybody before I go on? If you didn't get that, I do have a website, homosexuality101.com, 101.com. And I explain, there's a video, 17-minute video where I explain it. If you want to watch it again because maybe I went too fast, you can go back and watch that, homosexuality101.com. So you're not born gay and it's not a choice. There are things that happen in a person's life. And I'm just kind of going through this real quickly. So keep in mind, there may be other factors that you may know somebody who is gay and they say, well, that didn't exactly happen. There may have been other forms of developmental things that have happened to them that led them to having same-sex attraction. But I actually get emails from all over the world from people saying, wow, thank you for explaining that. I'm gay. I never knew why. In fact, some people have translated my stuff into other languages, people that I don't know and didn't know that was being translated, but I get emails from Muslims in countries where it's illegal to be gay saying, thank you for this information I never knew. So I have found that this fits for a lot of people, and not just in our country, but all over the world. People identify with this description. And you know what I have also found? And why I so wanted to be able to educate on this, which is why I made a website and put a video up there, is because some people don't want to be gay. They have attraction to the same sex, but they don't want to identify as gay. Some of them are being told you're born that way, and when they hear that, oh no, these are the things that can cause a person to have attractions, for some of them it's life-changing. They say, wow, I never knew. I finally understand myself. I finally understand what this is about. So it can be very life-changing. That leads us to the second myth. And you guys can answer in your mind what you think about this and what you've heard from the culture about this. You don't have to answer out loud, but can people who are gay change? Is it possible for someone who's gay to end up not being gay? Is that possible? What do you think? Answer to yourself, and then I will tell you. Yes, it's possible. The myth is it's not possible. What we've heard for years, in fact, gay rights were born on this, the gay rights movement was built on the foundation of people are born gay and they cannot change. Therefore, this is what we need to do as a culture. But those two things are not true, and those two things are harmful. Telling someone you're born gay and can't change, imagine the people that don't want to be gay, and the truth is change is possible. I've known people that were suicidal because they thought, this is who I am and I have no other option. People need to know there are options. So we know from research, change is possible. In fact, I have this document. This is online. I'm going to give you a handout at the end that has, if you want to look up the research, I'm going to give you a handout. You can go home and look it all up online. This document is in the handout that I'm going to give you. The link is there. You can read it online for free. It's a journal. It's a journal of human sexuality. But this is the first volume, and what the authors did is they went back and looked at the last 100 years of data. So they looked at the literature, the academic and scientific literature from 1909 to 2009, and they found that over the last 100 years, there's evidence people have been changing from homosexual attractions. And in fact, this has 800 references of looking at 3 different things, whether change is possible, and then 2 other things that I'll get into. But and so yes, change has been occurring for at least 100 years. We even know there's an ancient letter it's in the Bible actually, a letter to the city of Corinth that actually says some of those people had been gay, but they had changed. So that's 2,000 years evidence that change does happen, change is possible. But let me say this, change is different for everyone. Some people experience a little bit of change, some people experience a lot of change. People experience change in behavior. We know that behavior is changeable. For some, attractions also change, and for others, attractions don't change a lot. So I have a friend, in fact, Andrea mentioned Christine Sneeringer. She's a friend, that's how we met. She used to be a lesbian, and she gave that up over 20 years ago. Out of her commitment to God, she decided that wasn't what God had for her, and she has experienced change in her life. And she will tell you that her attractions have changed. She does not desire women the way she used to, and she does have attraction to men. So attractions can change, and I know many people, I know couples that both of them used to be gay, now they're married to each other, and a man and a woman married to each other. And because I'm involved in working with this issue, I know lots and lots of people who will tell you that they experience change in both behavior and attractions. But it's not an easy process. It's like any other issue. Someone who craves and is addicted to alcohol, we know that people can change from alcohol, being addicted to alcohol, right? They can change their behavior. Some people stop drinking, but they still crave it, but they choose not to drink. Others don't crave it as much, and some only, maybe once in a blue moon, they'll crave it, but most of the time they don't crave it. The same is true for this issue. Some people are still attracted to the same sex, but they learn to understand what that attraction's about, that it's an emotional need, and they learn how to get their needs met in the right way, and they learn how to manage it in a way that it doesn't dominate their lives anymore. And others go on to develop, like I said, opposite sex attractions. So I think it's important that we understand change is possible, but it's not like, boom, if you want to be straight, there you go, you can be straight. It's not that easy. It's a process. Therapy is part of it. There are ministries that are helpful in that process. It's dealing with the root issues is the key. So on this note of change, there is a Netflix documentary that's coming out in August. And by the way, so the culture, it will tell you what? Change is impossible, right? The culture is going to say you cannot change. And you hear it over and over. How many of you have, like, on TV, on the news, or on TV shows, seen stories of change? Like, people changing from homosexuality and living wonderfully happy, peace-filled, joyful lives. Have you seen shows like that on regular mainstream TV? Not a lot. Friend, yes. Friend. Yes, exactly. In fact, I wanted to ask that. How many of you do know someone who was gay, but they no longer identify as gay? How many of you do? Oh, good, yes, exactly. Okay, that's awesome. More than I was, yeah, that's great. And they're out there. They are out there. But on the media, will you hear that in the media? No, typically not. So, the media does not want you to know that, because the myth is people can't change. So there's a Netflix show coming out in August that is making fun of people that try to leave homosexuality. And I've only seen the preview, I haven't seen the whole thing, so I'm only basing this on what I've seen. So it's called Pray Away, like Pray Away the Gay. They make it sound like people are doing something,
Gay conversion therapy, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Okay, so they feature a guy named John Polk in that movie, and they talk about how he was a spokesperson for leaving homosexuality. He was married to a woman, and then he went back into homosexuality. You know what they don't tell you? He was married to a woman named Anne. She also was a lesbian. They came together, got married. For 20 years they were married. John went back to the gay lifestyle. Anne never went back. Anne leads a network of Christian ministries throughout the country. She's been walking in freedom for 40 years from homosexuality. So why did Netflix not include Anne on the show? If you want to do a fair reporting, let's talk about John and Anne. Anne is still walking heterosexually, not homosexually. There's another guy they feature named Randy Thomas. He was also a leader in a ministry called Exodus. He left and went back to the gay lifestyle. Well, I know Randy, and I know who he dated, a girl named Lorraine. He was in love with Lorraine. Lorraine broke up with him. He was devastated. I remember consoling him after they broke up. Well, he went back into homosexuality. Lorraine never did. She's still walking in freedom. Why aren't they talking about that? What's happening in shows like that, they show you one side. They show you only the people that gave up their journey. But there are many, many more, hundreds more that did not give up their journey. And I believe they also feature someone who started a ministry called Exodus, but he was a co-founder with someone else. That guy went back into homosexuality. This guy walked in freedom for over 40 years, was married, and lived he lived heterosexually until he died in 2017. You don't hear about that. So when you watch these things and hear these myths, keep in mind, they're telling you one side of the story, which isn't fair at all. The truth of the matter is people can change and do change and are thankful that they have pursued heterosexuality. The ones that have pursued it and have stuck with it would tell you it's the best thing they ever did. Okay, so the third myth, is it harmful for people to seek change? Someone mentioned the word conversion therapy. So the myth I want to talk about here is, I'll just tell you the myth and then I'm going to ask you a question. So the myth is, if you try to seek change, it's harmful. It is going to be damaging. If you're gay and you try not to be gay, that's going to be harmful to you. Okay, so that's the myth. And it's all under this idea of conversion therapy. Let me ask you this. How many of you have heard the term conversion therapy? Okay, what do you think that means? What comes to mind? What's conversion therapy?
What I think conversion therapy is when your parents or someone that you know doesn't support what you are sexually,
Okay.
and they try to change that about you because they don't like that.
Okay, so someone doesn't like who you really are and they want to change you. Okay, good. What else do you think of when you think of conversion therapy?
This is not what I think, but I think that when people hear about gay conversion therapy, they think it's some sort of cult
Yes.
or brainwashing
Yes.
experience
Yes.
attached to Christianity.
Yes, that's a good, yes, I think that's exactly what people think. What else do you think of when you think of conversion therapy?
When I think of conversion therapy, I actually think of a lot of things, but something that actually comes to mind is a lot of people, when they're making a transition, actually try to change how they sound. Where some people's voices sound more feminine to, going back to wherever. But
Okay.
that's just an example for males, at least.
Okay, yeah, trying to change how they come across. Okay. Other things you might hear about conversion therapy, that it's electroshock therapy, they're torturing kids, they're sending kids away to these camps where bad things are happening to them. That's just not true. Lawmakers use this term, activists use this term to convince lawmakers to make it illegal. Conversion therapy is something harmful being done to gay people and it needs to be stopped. When the fact is, what they're banning, when I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but so activists say conversion therapy is this bad thing, we need to make it illegal, and then when they make it illegal, what they're making illegal is actually just talk therapy. It's actually a therapist talking to a person who wants help changing, not parents who are forcing their kid to change, because you can't force someone to change. So I'm a therapist. I work with all sorts of issues, right? Marriage issues, family, parenting, depression, anxiety, cutting, all that kind of stuff. I also help people that have unwanted homosexual attractions. So you know what I get called? A conversion therapist. You know what I do with the people that have unwanted homosexual attractions in my office? The same thing I do with everybody else. I talk. We talk about their problems and we look at the roots of the problem. What are the pains and the painful experiences and the wounds from childhood? What are the perceptions of themselves? How did those, the same kind of stuff you're doing here in this thing. We talk about struggles, and it's the same way that I interact with all my clients. So the activists have made it out to be that there's some really bad, harmful, terrible thing happening. It needs to be outlawed, and what they're outlawing is kids, typically they're trying to make it illegal for kids to have therapy. They're outlawing kids from getting help when they have unwanted homosexual attractions. By the way, I can't force anybody to change. I work with people who want to change. There are kids who want to change, who say, I'm attracted to the same sex, but this isn't who I want to be. Can you help me? And it is possible to help them. And so anyway, yes, so people can change. And let me tell you this, another thing we're hearing lately, their study just came out that said kids that go to therapy to try to change it, they call it conversion therapy, those kids are more suicidal. Therapy makes kids suicidal. That's the new myth that we're going to be hearing more and more about. So if you look close at this study, so I have someone I know, a colleague, who dissected the study, looked at all the data, and what they have found is that there was a survey done among gay teenagers, and the questions were asked: have you been suicidal? Have you gone to therapy? Have you tried suicide? All these questions. And and in the end they said the kids that went to therapy were more suicidal than the kids that didn't, so therapy causes suicide. What's wrong with that thinking? Does anybody know what's wrong with that thinking? Yes.
That they were probably suicidal, so they went to therapy to get help for the suicidal thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. Guess what? The data is actually clear on when they were suicidal and when they went to therapy. The kids were suicidal more suicidal before therapy, less suicidal after. So yes, it's exactly that. The kids that were more suicidal are probably the ones that went to therapy. So when the suicidal kids are saying, yes, we had therapy, it was after they were more suicidal, and after they had therapy, they were less suicidal. So you're going to hear this, though, and it's important that you understand, because some of these LGBT issues are the issues of the day. Especially now, it's the transgender wave, and you're going to hear more and more and more, and it's important that you understand you're not being told the truth, and that's really sad, because that's discouraging kids from getting therapy. And like I said, I know kids that are suicidal because they think they can't change, and that they are stuck being gay and they don't want to be. So lying to people isn't helping anyone. Okay, so that's the third myth then. It is not harmful. In fact, studies have shown even people, not just kids, people that seek therapy for unwanted homosexual attractions, even the ones that drop out and say, you know what, my attractions aren't changing, I want to go ahead and be gay, embrace a gay identity, even they will tell you, but the therapy helped me have better self-esteem, helped me be less depressed, helped me in all these other ways. So therapy is helpful even when it doesn't accomplish the goal of the attractions changing. Does that make sense? And I want to clarify here, anytime you go for help anywhere, whether it's a therapist or a medical doctor, there's always the chance that it's not going to be helpful. So I'm not trying to imply that all therapy is helpful, but in general, when we look at people that have gone to therapy for this issue, we're finding that therapy is helpful in a number of different ways. Of course, there's always going to be the bad therapy experience, just like there's always the bad doctor experience or the bad treatment for anything, really. Okay, so number fourth myth. Can you decide what you want, whether you want to be a boy or a girl? So we're hearing a lot, you can choose. If you want to be a girl, be a girl. If you want to be a boy, be a boy. So think about this in your mind for a minute. First of all, how many of you have heard that? If you want to be a girl, be a girl. If you want to be a boy, be a boy. Yes, they're even telling kids as young as kindergarten in some places, be who you want to be. So most of you have heard that, right? So answer quietly to yourself, is that true? Can a boy be a girl and can a girl be a boy? No. But so that's the answer is no. So let me explain though, because actual educated people are saying to children, you can choose. And here's how that works. If you do not like being a boy, start dressing, this is the advice. This is actually the medical community's advice to parents. If your child is gender confused, let that child from the age of 3 years old decide if he wants to wear a dress, if he wants to go by a girl's name, let him. Then when he's around 9, if he still wants to be a girl, put him on hormones to stop puberty from happening. Then this is mainstream medical advice. Then after puberty, when puberty would have happened, give him opposite sex hormones for the rest of his life, so that he will develop traits as a girl, female traits. Then later at 18, if he wants to have surgery and cut parts off and try to add new parts, then he can do that. That's the path that is recommended. Now, first of all, the side effects of those hormones and the surgeries, the complications with those surgeries are a whole other topic. Second of all, children change their minds. I got an email from a girl who said at 14 she convinced her dad to go on hormones because she wanted to be a boy. Then at 17 she changed her mind. Now she has to pluck hair out of her face for the rest of her life, and she has a deep voice. She'll never have her girl voice back. But here's the thing, even if she had persisted in wanting to be a boy, her DNA will never change. chromosomes are in every cell throughout, male or female chromosomes are in all of our cells throughout our body. So a transgender person, if they do a blood test, their birth sex is what's going to show up in that blood test, because we have chromosomes throughout our entire body that determine whether we're male or female. And so kids are being lied to and parents are being lied to, and that's really sad, because especially when it comes to kids, many of them will change their minds and have lots of regret. In fact, this is already happening. We're already seeing laws getting changed in England. There was a lawsuit, a girl who was fast-tracked down the transgender pathway, changed her mind, and ended up suing the hospital that did this. And now in England, they finally are saying you can't do that to anyone under 16 without a court order. It's still happening in the United States. Medications, hormones are being given to kids regularly right now here in the United States. But hopefully people are waking up from this crazy delusion that we've been in. Let me say this. We need to have compassion, because some children truly do not like themselves. And as I was explaining gender identity development, things have happened that have led them to not like themselves. And that's a terrible place to be. It's very sad to not like who you are. So it is important to be compassionate. But it's much easier to help a child change their thinking about themselves than to try to change their body. What our culture is saying is, change your biology, not your psychology, right? Our culture is saying, change your body to match your mind, rather than let's help them change their mind and help figure out, why do they not like who they are? Why do they feel inadequate as a boy or girl? What's going on inside of them? Let's help them deal with that. The culture would rather say, no, let's change their body to align with their thinking. And we know, and you guys are going to be talking about this throughout the week, we can change our thinking, because sometimes our thinking is off. It makes a whole lot more sense. Okay, and then the last myth, the fifth myth, and I'll take questions at the end, is, if you, okay, I'm just going to tell you it, I won't ask you this question. So the parents are often told, you have to let your child transition, because if you don't, they might commit suicide. The saying is, to a parent, would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter? If you don't let your son become a girl, he might kill himself. Would you rather plan his funeral or his transition? That's often what parents are told. Now, the truth is, transgender children and adults sometimes are suicidal because they hate themselves, and that is tragic. But the myth is, let them transition so they're not suicidal. Transitioning doesn't reduce suicidal thinking. So for some people, adults that transition, at first they're so happy. I'm finally the boy or the girl, the man or the woman that I wanted to be. But guess what? The depression is still there, the anxiety, the mental health issues, and the suicidal thinking are all still there. So that is an important myth we need to understand. Yes, transgender individuals are suicidal, but the research shows that even after they transition, adults, we're talking about adults now, even after they transition, they're still 40% more suicidal than non-transgender people. So it is very sad, and there are problems that need to be addressed. But transitioning doesn't take away the suicidal thinking. That's not the answer, and that's why I'm saying dealing with the mind, especially when we're talking about children, because it's so much easier to deal with things in our childhood than in adulthood. And again, that kind of speaks to how wonderful it is you guys have this opportunity here to begin to address some of the wounds you've already experienced in your life, and begin to relate in healthy ways and understand what's going on within yourself. I'm going to close with this, and then I'll take questions. On a good news note, there is a group of people, and I think they're also featured in this Netflix documentary, but I think they're featured in a bad light, like, ha ha, look at them type thing. But they're a new generation of people that are leaving homosexuality, transgenderism, and other LGBT, anything within that LGBT description. And they've started this movement called the Freedom March. And they go around to big cities and they talk about how they have found freedom. It's a Christian movement. They talk about how they have found freedom through God, through Jesus, in leaving homosexuality, gay prostitution, transgenderism, all different kinds of things. And I'm helping to bring them to West Palm Beach, October 23rd. You're welcome to come. It's a free outdoor event. It's going to be from Saturday, October 23rd, from 12 to 5, an outdoor praise and worship and test. It's just going to be story after story after story after story of people that have left homosexuality. Wow. Totally free in downtown West Palm Beach.
Wow.
So yes, I know. So pray for that to come together. So anyway, one last thing. 2 of the leaders of the Freedom March, how many of you heard of the Pulse nightclub shooting? Do any of you remember that 5 years ago? It was so sad. It was in it was Orlando.
Oh, Orlando, that's right.
49 people were killed. It was a gay nightclub. 49 people were killed. It was so sad. 2 of these guys that lead the Freedom March were in the Pulse nightclub. One of them was shot 6 times and one of them was trampled. They both thought they were going to die, but God spared their lives and they gave up homosexuality, and now they go around with this march saying that God has set them free. One was a pastor's son whose mom was praying for him, and he survived and tells about the change in his life. So he'll be there at the Freedom March sharing as well. It is so exciting. So, okay, any questions before I end? Yes.
I have 3, but the second, it's like a 2-part. Okay. I'm Sophie. I'm actually at FAU studying psychology, so I'm literally like, I'm sitting here on the edge of my seat, like hanging by your every word. I think it's so interesting. Okay, so the first one is just like a individual question. Do you think that transgender people who struggle with suicidal thoughts, because you were talking about nature versus nurture, I've heard people say like, oh, they're suicidal because of the way that they're treated, because they don't have rights, because they don't have equality like every heterosexual person out there, so that's what makes them suicidal. Do you think that that's like an environmental thing or a nature thing, like their psychology?
Okay. So we know that, so if you think about not liking who you are is very distressing, and there have been things that have happened in their lives that have led to the anguish that they feel, and so I would suggest that there are more environmental things causing the suicidal thinking, as well as there may be, low serotonin, things like that. We know from studies of other cultures that in gay affirming cultures, there are still high suicide rates. In other words, it's not because they're being bullied or not accepted, because in cultures like Denmark, New Zealand, Sweden, where it is widely accepted, the suicide rates are just as high. So that is a myth also that I didn't even get to today.
Oh, thank you. Okay, and then
but we still need to be kind and compassionate. People are hurting, so it's not an excuse to be mean to people. By all means, we need to be loving and compassionate.
Of course, that was just like the source of my question. And then my second/third question, it goes along with what you just said. I was having a conversation with one of my friends who, I won't even go into it, but we were talking about homosexuality and homosexuality in the church. And, statistically, there are people that go to church that identify as Christian that also struggle with same-sex attraction. So my 2-part question is, 1, what would you say to straight Christian kids who may know someone who deals with same-sex attraction, how to treat them respectfully and just like be there without making people feel like, oh, you have to change? And then the second part is, what would you say to those people who are in a faith-based community that are struggling with same-sex attraction?
Okay. Your last question, I'll say, to anyone, I would say, if you do not want to embrace a gay identity and you have same-sex attractions, seek out help. And there are resources. I have a handout, and there's resources on that where if you are someone or you know someone who wants help, you can get help. So there are organizations and there are good resources and therapy as well from someone who understands this issue, which is hard to find sometimes. Then the other thing is, I would say, if you're a Christian with friends that are gay, the whole thing about being a Christian is coming into a relationship with God and allowing Him to take over every single part of your life. And so I would encourage you to point your friends to God, that He has a plan, He loves you, His plan is better than our plan, and just encourage them in growing in their faith and relationship with God, and God will do the transformation that needs to happen. Okay, one more question, or maybe more than one.
I run into, from time to time, people that had severe big operations done, like men becoming women, and I'm curious to know, after they made a decision to go back, if their voices changed and all this, what adjustments, like, is there a way to reverse the voice change in a way that doesn't do, that's
right.
Well, how does that work?
Right.
Basically?
Yeah, and I don't know all the ins and outs of surgery and so forth, but I do know that some of these changes do not reverse. like I mentioned, the girl who, she'll have facial hair the rest of her life. The deep voice is not going to go back. So there are some things that are not going to be reversible. As far as with surgery, since that's outside my area, I actually don't know. But I do know that they're very complicated surgeries. And I'm going to guess that there are side effects that people experience. And even the hormones, I knew a kid that was on hormones. He wanted to be a girl and changed his mind later. But the hormones damaged his bones. You know, they weaken the bones. I mean, some of this stuff is pretty severe. So yeah, that's my best answer to that one.
My question is, you know how you're talking about boys not connecting to their fathers, which is why they could dwell and want that attention, which is why they like other men. What about girls and boys? Like, if you don't have like such a strong father figure or a mother figure, could you become like questioning if you want to be bisexual?
Sure.
Could that be the reason?
Oh, for bisexuality?
Yeah.
Yeah. One theory, so by the way, with not having a father, the other thing is finding father figures or finding a mother. Sometimes the church community is a good place for finding a youth pastor. So boys that don't have good fathers or good relationships with their fathers, it's still possible later in life to develop healthy relationships with other father figures or role models or that kind of thing. So I want to give hope to anyone here who didn't have a good relationship with a mother or a father. One theory on bisexuality is the child may have had the development in the early stage, the 1.5 to 4, may have gone just fine, but they might have had a trauma later. So the bonding with the same-sex parent might have happened, but then maybe later there was a trauma, maybe it was sexual abuse, or maybe there was a break in the bond with the same-sex parent later, or bullying from same-sex peers, or something like that. That's one theory on how a person could develop both. Again, it's so complex. There's so many different things that can happen during childhood. So it could be, you know, they had some good relationship, but then still a craving, maybe not enough of the need being met, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Okay. I think that's the last, or one more question, and then we're going to wrap up.
Like, have you ever seen any kids that like had the parent, the father and the mother in their life, but they're still
Yes.
gay?
Absolutely. Yes. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Another one.
Okay, I'll elaborate. Go ahead.
And then also, is it LGBT or is there plus at the end?
There's a lot of letters at the end. I kind of stopped with the T, but LGBTQIA++. There's a lot of letters. It just kind of encompasses anything non-heterosexual. Yes, so people, it does go on, but I just kind of stop at the T myself. But yes, so yes, sometimes, in fact, I've talked to people. I have a friend who says he had a great relationship with his mother, he had a great relationship with his father, and there was never anything that went wrong, but I know him, and I watched him grow up, and I know his father was abusive. He just doesn't recognize that it was abuse because he grew up in it and doesn't realize. And so there's that. I also want to say, I know wonderful parents that love their children and are great parents, yet their children do end up gay. And again, sometimes it goes back to perception. The child might have perceived something that caused him to retreat or not fully attached to the same-sex parent. Or it could be, like I said, with the peer rejection. Maybe he navigated the parent bond just fine, but by 5 he had a hard time with peers or he was bullied. So it could be those other factors. It's very important to note, just because a child is, I want to be sure that we're not going to be blaming parents. In my description, it's the combination of what happens with the parents and how the child perceives it and takes it in, and it's the temperament of the child that really makes a difference. Because like I said, I do know great parents who somehow the child there was something that happened in their perception of their experiences, and then other outside factors that led them to really have some holes that they seek to fill through same-sex relating. Okay, hope I left everybody clear and not confused. Thanks for your attention. You guys have been great.